Welcome, everybody, to this webinar today, where we'll be focusing on a project completed between Zoocha and Global Touring. The theme of the webinar today is going to be how we built that platform for growth and unified the Global Touring digital estate. My name is Hannah O'Leary. I will be facilitating today and fielding any questions to the team. So without further ado, we'll move into introductions from our panelists. So George, you're up first.
Thank you, Hannah. Hi, everyone. I'm George. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Global Touring. For those who may not have heard of us, we are a travel collective of 3 leading small group touring brands, Top Deck, Backroads, and Grasshopper Adventures. So we offer the very best group travel experiences to destinations all around the world, and each of our brands has a very different target audience and travel style. I lead the marketing, brand and digital for all the brands, which includes responsibility for the website, so the front and the back end, and all the revenue we generate through them, which is an increasingly important channel for all of our brands. I'm the overall sponsor for the project at Global Touring. Very happy to be here today to talk about our migration to a single source CMS.
I'll go next. Good afternoon. I'm Ben Lafoe. I'm the Digital Operations and Development Manager at Global Touring. So I look after a digital team that's responsible for effectively specifying and defining development requirements, so both for the back end and the front end. And we also do testing on those when they come back and bug reporting. So my role in the project and my team's role was we define the original project backlog. And effectively I sort of played a role that was analogous to being an agile product owner. But yeah, I worked very closely with Zoocha to kind of define the initial scope and then sort of breaking that down into manageable bits as the project went forward.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah McDermott. I am Delivery Director at Zoocha. I have worked with Global Touring since the very start of our relationship way back in around 2018. But more recently, I worked with the delivery team with the planning and execution of this strategic project and all the various moving parts.
And hi everyone, I'm Amanda Glasgow. I'm Creative Director at Zoocha and I lead UX, UI and user research. And I've been part of the project throughout the discovery sessions, user research and the design phase.
Great. So just so everyone's aware, this webinar is being recorded today, and we will jump into our first question to field to the panelists, which is setting the scene. So looking to understand how Zoocha and Global Touring started working together.
So I shall kick off. So Zoocha started working with Global Touring a few years before I joined. As Hannah just mentioned, it was in 2018. And at the time, Zoocha had come in to replace another supplier who had built our initial Drupal sites. We had 2 Drupal sites that effectively between them covered a couple of brands. And already they inherited a sort of web estate that was 90% the same between the 2 sites, but with small but niggling differences. And over the years, those differences sort of continued to grow and become more of an issue. So essentially, I think it's fair to say Zoocha inherited a situation and websites that had a fair amount of bad code, or sort of let's say not best practice code, and there was a fair amount of sort of technical debt and general complexity each time my team sort of tried to address bugs and look at sort of functional issues. Another impact, I think, in the background was, of course, the impact of COVID. There'd been a couple of years where essentially the bare minimum of development and maintenance had been carried on sites. Obviously, being a travel company, we didn't actually have any passengers for a long time, so that kind of reduced the amount of work that we were sort of able to do. So essentially, I think Zoocha came in to sort of rescue a slightly failed project and then sort of build on that.
I think also to follow on from what Ben said there, you mentioned around pre and post COVID. I think over that time we've worked on a whole host of different ventures with the Global Touring team, including actually the Top Deck app. And over the course of that relationship and partnership, I think we've had the opportunity to build real strong subject matter expertise across our delivery teams, in spite of some stumbling blocks on the way. And also implement really effective ways of working and establish, ultimately mutual respect between our teams through all of the projects and the various pieces of work that we've delivered. And I think, in terms of talking about the context of this project, all of that combined has really laid the foundation for, the transformation piece. Is ultimately we didn't need to form a new delivery team from scratch. We could build on top of that existing successful partnership.
Yes, and joining that successful partnership, my first encounter with Global Touring was actually the pitch for the companion app that Hannah just mentioned. So I was still very new to Zoocha and eager to get on board with Global Touring, as we had such a good sort of strong track record with them on the technical side. But it was really kind of the first opportunity to show our kind of creative chops, if you like. And we pitched and won, which I was delighted with, taking it off the incumbent agency. So real exciting for a start of our kind of creative supplier relationship with Global Touring. As I said, we'd already built up the trust, but this was the first opportunity to show what we could do end to end. And Ben had been really clear in the purpose of the app, but that didn't stop us, pushing the creative a little bit further and demoing a little bit of future gazing, functionality of what it could possibly turn into. But overall, we're thankful that we were able to demonstrate the answer to the brief, and able to support the immediate strategy for the replacement of the app for TopDeck for the first release. And that first release itself was quite a fast turnaround. Obviously, with holiday periods coming, it was, we had to get it ready before the first kind of, big booking surge of the season. So, it just opened up, the successful delivery of that really opened up to what we're talking about today, the platform piece of work.
Yeah, so it's fantastic to hear the background to the project and how the partnership has grown. But today we're going to talk about that next phase of the global touring estate. So it'd be great to hear from everyone. What were the key motivators behind the scenes in the lead up to that project?
Well, thanks, Anna. I'll start off with answering that question. So we cast our mind back to 2020. As difficult as COVID was for us and the travel industry as a whole, really gave us an opportunity to step back and dive deeply into the future strategy for global touring and our brands and how we wanted to build back and what those ambitions for the overall group were. Of course, we needed to get back on the road again. We've got all these great ideas. We need to get back on the road, start taking more and more customers on our travel experiences, and rebuild the business back. But as soon as those borders did open, and that was happened, this was identified as one of the projects and the key enablers of our growth. And there was two real parts to it. One was around showcasing our offering in the best possible way, and then driving an increasing amount of volume of revenue coming through our websites. When we first started talking about this, we only had 2 brands in the group, and then we had the addition of Grasshopper in 2024. So as that digital estate grew in importance, we needed our digital platforms to scale and grow. And as Ben said, earlier, we'd not significantly developed our sites for a number of years, so they really did need a lot of work on all fronts.
I think just to sort of follow on from that. So I joined the business in 2022, and a lot of my first year in the role, as well as getting to learn the infrastructure, how all the integrations work, and figure out the relationship with Zoocha from a personal level, was it just felt like we were constantly sort of chasing little bugs and niggling issues and tweaking lots and lots of little things, which to some extent you can do endlessly. But I sort of felt that I wasn't necessarily, addressing the root cause of these things. So I stole an idea that I had seen put into practice from a previous project and asked Zoocha to carry out a code audit, because I really kind of wanted to know the state of the nation. Where are the problems? What are the really big things that maybe we could actually devote some proper amount of time to fix and address, and then just overall make all the platforms and both the sites more stable. And there were lots of recommendations that I kind of expected, but in the midst of all this was a comment by the most senior dev we worked with, which was, if we were building the sites like this now, this isn't how we do this. And that really sort of resonated with me. And I kind of mentioned it to George. I think it resonated with him too. And we're kind of looking at why are we sort of fighting with these two very similar but slightly different sites, but which to a great extent are doing the same thing, all integrating with the same other external platforms in the business. When really, you know, what we need is a single stable infrastructure that we can trust, that we can then build on as a foundation. So that kind of became the sort of, from my perspective, the initial impetus for the project. You know, we were going to rebuild in not necessarily a massively ambitious sense, you know, rebuild what we had and what we knew was working, but in a clean, stable way, using best practice, entirely using Zoocha code, moving totally away from the legacy code that was a bit wonky, and then sort of have a starting position that we could then, you know, build a proper sort of new functional site from.
Yeah, and of course, alongside those business goals of having, you know, one platform and creating efficiencies for the business, our key motivators at Zoocha were really to ensure that we designed a user-centric experience, I mean, above everything. And, you know, we were looking to streamline the Inspire to Book journey, as we knew that there was definitely ways that we could improve that ease of use, with a focus on inclusivity and user engagement. So, you know, during discovery, we conducted collaborative workshops with the global touring team, taking in valuable insights from the customer service team and also from the website analytics, which enabled us to look, you know, holistically at the as-is state. We did, you know, quite a lot of competitor analysis to see what, you know, is happening out there on the market. You know, and all of this helped to influence how we could balance that combination of what the business need was and what the users actually wanted. So we conducted these explorative sessions, and we even had the team sketching, which everyone took part of which was great. And we were able to, you know, do some rapid sketching and ideation before taking away all of our learnings and, you know, moving into rapid prototyping. Validation of our hypothesis is key. So, you know, we're really keen about getting users' point of view, but, you know, and it's really vital. So we conducted some one-to-one sessions that Global Touring helped us set up with their existing customer base. So people that had already been on tours, you know, to see how the experience compared to what they've been through. And we were able to do this across 2 brands. So that was really relevant. At this point, there was only 2 brands, but, you know, very different audiences, but still having the kind of same thing. You know, they have the same goal. They, you know, they want to come to the site. They want an easy kind of Inspire journey, you know, an easy way to book. And we wanted to instill trust in them. So the results were clear. It gave us the validation that we needed to move into the design phase with a degree of confidence. We looked specifically at the inspiration pages with the goal of making the pages clearer, cleaner, more interactive. We wanted to really get that user engagement and, you know, of course, as I said, encouraging users to book. And the booking flow itself needed to be simplified to remove any of confusion, you know, that we were getting people contacting customer service. We wanted to make it a more inclusive process. And clear to users why we were asking for information, you know, so better guidance, a bit more of a hand-holding approach that would enable better room selections where room sharing is an option. And of course, you know, when changing anything, especially like user flow, it's vital where we're generating company revenue. That validation was really important, that, you know, we made sure that it's what users really want and need. So the one-to-one sessions where we tested the hypothesis really came into value there. So despite the different audiences, the intent, as I said, remains the same across the brands, and the results of these sessions gave us clear guidance, which aligned our thinking for user motivations, giving us the validation to move forward with a good degree of confidence.
So it's great to hear that a little bit about, yes, the technical planning behind the scenes, and also how we consider that user experience. But I think it'd be really helpful actually to dive into that a little bit more. So we've obviously the shared code base that's used to facilitate growth. It'd be good to understand how that shared foundation actually shaped the user experience.
Well, the creation of the global design system ensures scalability and consistency and efficiency across the global touring platform. But rather than designing for individual brands in isolation, the focus was to establish a shared foundation that would help with the one code base, which consisted of what are the principles across the brand, what components would we need, what kind of interaction patterns were we looking for, and were these capable of creating and supporting all the user journeys we needed across brands. Whilst each brand has a distinct proposition, as George said, they're very different audiences and very different needs. They share the same need and fundamental experience. So they need to be inspired, informed, and confident to commit to booking. The design system therefore prioritised these common experiential needs, allowing for the brand expression and the content that we overlay to provide and differentiate their experiences. On top of a consistent and trusted set of components, you've really got the foundation there that you could apply and change the flavour. For example, Backroads really emphasises and considers off the beaten track exploration, that you can only do this with a small group. It will take you to places that you've never been to before. While Top Deck is at the other end, really amplifies energy, pace, and that sense of immediacy and the fear of missing out. And it's obviously got a much younger audience base. And then you've got Grasshopper, which was kind of a late addition to the portfolio, and that focuses obviously on it's a biking adventure, so two-wheeled adventures. And just having that slightly later acquisition of Grasshopper further validated our system's flexibility, which was great because there were slightly new functional requirements, such as how do you select your bike based on your bike height, etc., or just understanding, what percentage of the journey will I actually be cycling versus walking, or any water-based activities. And we were able to integrate these into the experience without compromising or needing to change the broader design system, and this demonstrated that the design system has an ability to absorb new brands and complex use cases whilst maintaining a coherence across the rest of the ecosystem.
Cool. Thanks, Amanda. So, as we've mentioned, modernising the sites and improving that overall user experience really was one of the key requirements for the project. And that flexible solution means we can take this approach of kind of create once and then style for each brand, which, from my perspective, helps speed up the time taken to develop, but also reduces the budget required, which is a really great advantage for us. And we're able to do that and still maintain that brand integrity for each site, and also account for some of those variances Amanda mentioned as well. We've got very different customers for each of the brands, but using that core design system and the flexibility that brings has really worked for us. And then a slightly different angle on this, that the solution brings a much better experience to the visitors of our smaller brand, Grasshopper Adventures. It's a much smaller brand, and on its own, that wouldn't be able to sustain the ongoing development costs that we're now able to deliver for it. So we get real cost benefits by having all three sites in one core platform, and the results sort of speak for themselves. So if I just take Grasshopper as an example, in the last 2 months, the revenue generated through that site is 20% up year on year. And of course, that won't be all down to the new site, but every single point of our conversion and booking funnel, we're seeing that improvement. We're seeing a conversion increase from each of the steps along the way, which then leads to the booking. So, not only do the sites look much better, deliver the experience or showcase the experience we deliver, but they're driving incremental revenue. Driving up the volume of bookings that come through the site, which was again one of the core purposes for us of taking on this project.
I think from my perspective, one of the differentiators in terms of this digital team compared to other places I've worked is we actually sit within the marketing team. So we have a clear directive that our role is to, ensure that we're helping to generate sales, that we're helping to, disseminate marketing messages, that we're helping to, get customers in, and there's a sort of, bottom line element to it. So it's really important that we actually understand our customers, that we know what they're trying to achieve, where the blockers are, how they're trying to achieve it. And we try really hard to sort of make sure that the team feel like that. So I think with everything we build, we try from the outset to try and be customer focused. We're not purely just sort of dryly looking at a list of functional requirements, but we try and take into account what the end goal, what we're trying to achieve is. And although, as both George and Amanda have mentioned, the three brands serve very different markets. I guess the benefit is that all our products do have a sort of core set of criteria and functions that customers are trying to do. All of them have a price. They all have, dates of departure. They all have, you need to know what you're getting included in your trip and this sort of information. So while we're treating three different demographics and markets, there's just requirements that all our customers have across the three brands. So we could start off with that in mind and just trying to think of the best way of being able to show the price, the best way of being able to sort of lead into dates and prices and a booking flow from the outset, regardless of which brand it was. And then we could kind of build on that. So we looked at the flows and the UI sort of holistically when building the first site, knowing then that the principles effectively would apply to the other two afterwards. And yeah, again, as Amanda said, one of the things, where we really do the differentiation between the three brands is in the content, in, the branding and the styling, the way we sort of, bring those sites together. I think one of the, maybe one of the hindrances or one of the old ways of working with the old sites is that there were loads of templates. So effectively a template for every different kind of page. And to some extent, as a backend user, that can make it quicker and simpler, but it really at some point can sort of really tie you down in terms of flexibility and what you're able to achieve. And here, with the component library that Amanda mentioned, we built all those so they're basically freely usable across any of the pages. We have actually very few fixed templates outside of the booking flow and our main product page. Everything else is kind of an empty, generic, blank slate. You can put anything in. So that gives us sort of day-to-day flexibility in terms of if we see something on page doesn't seem to be working, we can move the elements around. We can also learn from the different brands and see sort of what's working on one and try it on another. And also because we built in that way right from the outset, it kind of it's led incrementally just in general to sort of more flexibility afterwards. This was one of the guiding principles of the project. So I think that was a starting point, and in the project we questioned if we needed differences in the build between the brands. As Hannah mentioned, one of the brands has bicycles, they needed things a little bit differently than the others. We really questioned when those differences were necessary, and what the impact would be in terms of the time for the project, because everything costs money, and what impact that would have on UX. I think also then I think the other guiding principle was I'm really clear that when you're building new sites, when you're sort of building a digital product, you also need to then learn from all the data and the analytics you have access to. So it's been really important after the site's gone live, and the most recent one, it's been about sort of 4 months, is to look back and try and identify where a customer's having problems, where are the blockers, where are pages and content not performing as well as they should, and address that. When you build the site, it's not finished, you've just launched it, but you need to sort of continuously be enhancing and revisiting things and learning. So since launch, we've identified a couple of changes to our registration process based on feedback from the customer service team and our own analytics, and we really think we'll be able to make that process easier for customers going forward. So I think, there's an element of just making sure you're always learning after you've launched the thing.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's really great to hear when a focus on user experience and understanding of your customer base does produce those tangible results that George mentioned. So that's really encouraging. And I think to pivot slightly, discuss the impact on the users, but I think it'd be really great to understand. Obviously, Drupal was the technical solution underpinning this project, but perhaps on how on a day-to-day basis, how has the flexible Drupal system that has been implemented had perhaps a similarly positive impact on the global touring team?
Sure. I'll kick off with that. So we mostly have the same back-end team of users across the 3 sites. So from the outset, it's kind of easy to explain to the team, where the functional differences lie between the 3 sites. So that hasn't really been a challenge. But one of the project aims from the beginning was rationalizing where our content lives, because some of it previously had been in sort of external platforms, and it was all a bit of a sort of complicated mess. And we kind of wanted to use the project as an opportunity to bring it all into Drupal and have it all in one place. It was more sort of editable, more accessible, and as I said earlier, with the new component library, more sort of functional. So, as an example, in the previous site, we had lots of text boxes that could only accept text. We had now opened that up, so we could embed anything more or less anywhere if we needed to. As part of this, we had to onboard another internal team, and I was initially worried because they'd used this other platform, which wasn't a CMS. I'd never used a CMS before, and I thought, maybe this will pose some challenges. But to be really honest, they took to Drupal straight away, and we did the training session. I handed them over a couple of Word documents with, what to do, and there's been, they've needed really very, very little support once they've been trained. I think Drupal, like sort of any modern CMS, is as simple and as flexible as you'd choose to build it. And we thought about how the backend should be structured. We thought about how things should be labeled to make it clear. I think if you put that little bit of thinking in, it really doesn't have to be a complex platform when you sort of get to it. And I think also in terms of sort of the positive impact since now, as I mentioned, now we're a few months on from the sites being live, we can start thinking beyond just the MVP versions that we launched at the outset. So we started to extend the components and think about where we can make them more flexible and where we can start to enhance and bring in new functionality either we hadn't thought of at the time or we didn't have time to implement, or that was just a sort of nice to have. So one of the examples, we've got an embedded map tool, and we've been able to start doing some enhancements and some sort of extra functionality to that since the go live. So it's just a question of evolution, really.
Fantastic. I mean, obviously within Zoocha, we are massively passionate about Drupal, and it's always really good to hear when it does make the lives of the people who are using it easier day to day, because ultimately, as much as we love working with user experience, Drupal should be a useful tool for any organization that adopts it. So we've talked about the technical architecture planning, the background to the project. We've also gone through, the impact on user experience and the global touring team. So quite clearly, it was a really big project, 3 brands, and with a lot of moving pieces. So I think with that experience and perhaps looking in hindsight, where would really stand out as key to, making this project a successful delivery?
So from my perspective, and coming at it from a delivery perspective, of course, I would say that one of the key factors would be the combination of the maturity of our agile processes combined with a really pragmatic outcomes-led approach that we shared across both teams. And what I mean by that is that we had a well-established framework, Scrum, which is the framework we had always used with the global touring team prior to the project and what we use across all of our projects. But we were also very deliberate about not applying process for process sake. That's something that I'm very, very passionate about. And, outcomes should always trump process. So that was the kind of premise that we went into this project with, knowing that we did have a lot of moving parts and we had some very ambitious timelines. So, in terms of an example of this, I think a really good one to talk about was the onboarding phase for this project. I know I mentioned already we had a very well-established team that had worked with global touring for a long time, but in spite of that, we still invested the time up front to treat this like it was a fresh new project with a new client, and to act as if we didn't know each other and re-establish all those key parts that we need when it comes to delivering a project of this scale. So roles and responsibilities, reviewing and working out if we needed to adapt our ways of working, and also talk about risks, create a fresh risk register, have conversations about how we can mitigate them. So all that stuff that could have easily been left to the wayside, we spent time up front in spite of that short timeline. And I think that groundwork really paid off throughout delivery, even in what may seem as very small, and ultimately, they did become very significant agreements. So talking about onboarding, we discussed during that phase what the design review process would look like. And we had to agree there and then that actually, based on the timelines, the review process would need to be limited to 24 hours. And anyone who works on a project knows that's pretty ambitious. Usually that window would be somewhere between 48 hours through to a week or longer, depending on the size of the organization. And this was something that proved to be really critical in being able to deliver the UI assets that we've spent a lot of time talking about in this session, all of the design library and the components, deliver those just in time for the development cycle. So although on the surface that doesn't seem like it would have much of an impact, it actually had a huge impact on the success of the project. And as I sort of alluded to, I think on a project like this, when the deadlines are tight, it would have been very easy for us, both in terms of pressure from Global Touring or within our team, to sort of skip onboarding just to feel like we're accelerating in our progress. But actually, we all came to an agreement very early on that the best thing was for us to pursue it in the right way. And we know that best practice and our own painful experience in the past with skipping these kind of steps of the process, it is a false economy, essentially, And I think ultimately knowing which elements of the delivery framework are non-negotiable, things like onboarding, versus the elements that we can adapt case by case, like the design review period, that's all really essential to successful delivery at scale. We can't be dogmatic about process. We need to understand the goals of the project, the constraints of the project, and then work together as a team across both client and agency side to commit to that. And, I will always give kudos to the Global Touring team, because they were fully committed for the whole ride. And, things like the 24-hour turnaround would only have been possible based on them agreeing to do it and actually delivering on it. So, yeah.
I have to agree with all of that. I think there's also an interesting element, which is, at the beginning it sounds, but that's not going to be achievable. There's no way we can turn this stuff around in 24 hours. But actually, once you've done it sort of 3 weeks in a row, once you get into the groove, then that's just how you're working. It's actually a question of, I think you're right, setting these out, agreeing these things, and then just sticking to it, and then it becomes second nature. Literally, I think within the first month, it had then become every week we're getting assets, every week we're reviewing them, turning them around. Gregory at your end was then coming back with the refinements and the changes, and with it's you get into a groove and a flow, and for me that's actually one of the elements where sort of Scrum or Agile project is working properly, is you actually you get into that groove and you have that momentum. And I think from my side internally, it was really important to feed upwards. It's the second time I'm saying this in the course, it must be important, that actually the launch date would not be the end. We're aiming to an MVP because we have a date to launch and we have to get the sites live, but actually after that, you can build more, you can enhance more, you can fix forward. You need to look at the user data, look at how things are working on the site, and keep the momentum going to keep the sites sort of being improved. So, with that in mind, I think coming back to the question, what stands out as a key thing, I think actually for this project, this was a perfect use of a sort of agile process. I think, sometimes in smaller bits of BAU development, it maybe seems like, the work can awkwardly be put into that framework. But for something on this scale, it was over a year, and it was sort of, 10 months of intensive build and launching 3 sites in that 10 months, one after the other without stopping. I think in that context, that those processes work really well. And also, yes, you're right. We, our 2 sides do really trust each other. I think, it was really important to me that that in this we worked with the Zoocha team as if we were one whole team. We weren't two different sides just feeding in. We were all one team, and there were very, very open communications between all of us, between my team and everyone in Zoocha. At the end, everyone sort of knew everyone, and no one had a problem sort of raising any issues or contacting anyone or asking questions or any of that. I think so that meant we were all clearly focused on delivering the same goal. We all understood the risks, we all understood the pressures and the challenges, but we also all understood what we were trying to deliver, and we wanted to deliver the same thing. So I think that was a big part of it.
And then I think for me, if I look at what we achieved over the last year, we launched the 3 new sites, all 3 of them between May and September last year, all delivered on time, which really did require a phenomenal effort from all the teams involved. And you usually hear of regular delays on tech projects. That's nothing new, but for both Backroads and Top Deck, the website launches were coinciding with a major brand refresh at the same time, so that there really was no room for slippage. And the team at Global Touring and Zoocha, building on those existing working relationships and the team working really closely together was really, really critical. A few days delay here and there can soon mount up to a couple of weeks behind target. So that kind of transparency and agreement up front was really, really critical. And then to sort of reiterate what Hannah was mentioning there, that setting clear rules of engagement up front around the feedback turnaround times, rapid decision making, limited scope creep, and really sticking to that clear scope of what we were looking to deliver with a tightly managed sprint plan and a can-do attitude is what I think enabled us to hit those timelines. And it's massive kudos to everyone involved for hitting those timeframes. It's gone down really well internally. It's probably one of the best technically managed projects that we've ever delivered within Global Touring. And what we have now is a digital platform that we can all be proud of. And as Ben was saying, it's the core platform we've got now. From here on in, we'll continue to enhance and optimize and have regular development sprints. And we certainly look forward to continuing our partnership with Zoocha to build on it moving forwards.
Thanks, everyone. I think from that, for me, it was really clear and lovely to hear that from both sides, Zoocha and Global Touring, having kind of a shared experience of the project and the positive nature of the partnership. So I think that concludes the questions that we have for our panel prepared. So there have been some questions asked in the Q&A that we will go into to hopefully dive into a few different areas of the project. So the first one that's come in is about adding a new brand in the future. So it'd be how much work is involved and how quickly would that realistically happen?
Who wants to take that one? I guess just while we're working out the technical side of it, the very real possibility for us as we're a growing brand and business, and we have ambitions to bring more brands in the group, and that was the purpose of building the flexibility as we did, is so that we can slot brands in easily. As for the technical timeframes around that, I'll leave that to someone else.
I think well, to give you a really blunt answer from the project, we turned around the last site basically in a few months. In 3 months each, the delivery of each site became faster. The delivery of each site became slicker. As George mentioned, we were quite sort of ruthless on trying to avoid scope creep and sort of just cramming extra things in during the project, with a view that no, this is the scope, and we have to make sure that that's what we deliver, and then anything else we can sort of do afterwards within reason. I think realistically, if we understood the brand, if we understood the brand, the customers, what we're trying to achieve, assuming it was another travel brand and we weren't suddenly selling Pringles, then yeah, I think realistically we could probably turn something around in sort of 3 to 4 months. But obviously I'll always ask for more time if it's available.
Great. And I think the next question that's come in, so were there any design or usability compromises that you had to make to support different audiences?
I would say no. The beauty of the design system, as we said, it's been really flexible. I think where compromises lie maybe usually occur with time and budget. So where we were very, had strict deadlines on MVPs, maybe there's things that we introduce a phased approach. What do we need for first release? And then what can we put in? But as far as accommodating different audiences, there wasn't really any compromise. And I would say the one thing that we never compromise on is usability. So every product for every audience should always be usable and accessible. And, we really had a strong steer on inclusivity as well. And that's where some of the user research came in. So usability, compromise, no. Time and budget, features can get scaled back at times and tend to get, second release. But yeah, no in answer.
And there's one last question here that's come in while the session's been ongoing. But please feel free to raise your hand in the participants or drop any more into the Q&A before we wrap up. And that last one is about the content editors. So how much control are content editors given over the site, and how much has to be done through Zoocha?
Okay, I think I can take this one. I think from a best practice point of view, in a project like this, it's always worth remembering that, as well as the customers and what we normally think of as the users, actually internal users are also, you need to take into account as well. They're also stakeholders. They're also going to be using the product and the tool at the end of the project. And one of the factors of the old sites was that they did have quite a lot of restricted components that could only really be used in very specific ways and very specific templates. And it was frustrating internally because, we'd be asked, well, we can do this thing here. Why can't we do it there? And, oh, well, that doesn't work on that template. That only works here. And as I alluded to earlier, I think a lot of this actually went back to the site's pre-Zoocha's involvement with global touring. So from the outset of this project, as George mentioned, we had defined a sort of set of guiding principles for the project to follow. And they included building from a sort of mobile first perspective. That was quite important to me, but also freeing up any areas where copy or content could be added to components to make them really fully HTML flexible. So right from the outset, we've immediately had a lot more flexibility in where we could put images, text, video, embedded TikToks, whatever the content is. And where possible, we also made as much of the site itself editable from the Drupal backend, by my team and other CMS users. So, it doesn't just involve a code change to actually make those changes. So overall, our team's, much more autonomous and has much more control than on the previous websites. And, I think for the project, the important thing was to do that wherever possible. So it isn't always possible. There is, for example, if you were to make every template for booking flow freely editable, that might have consequences that could break everything. But I think in general, for every kind of sort of normal page template, we achieved the right balance, and we have a very flexible, usable component library now that we can apply everywhere.
Thank you, Ben. So that concludes the questions that have been asked through the chat. I will leave it a second or two if anybody wants to raise their hand or ask any further questions. I will say as well that if you have any questions or want to continue the conversation further with either Zoocha or the Global Touring team, you can reach out to all of us directly on email, and we'd be more than happy to keep talking with you about the project or any particular areas of crossover that may be impacting your own organization. So I can't see any hands raised for the moment. So thank you everybody for attending, and thank you to our amazing panelists for going through the project. There's been a lot covered, from Drupal architecture, proper planning, partnership approach, and centering a user experience to actually yield tangible results. So thank you everybody for attending, and I hope to speak to you all soon.